Hello and welcome from the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Late last week, one of my friends left his car in our parking lot while he was off on a trip using the train. Great, wonderful, no problem. Except that when I looked at it over the weekend, I noticed that one of his tires had gone flat. Being the thoughtful, caring, entirely responsible person that I am, I decided I would drive his car down the block to the nearest gas station and put some air in the tire. And when I got there, the pump was looking like it was working, but it wasn't actually putting any air out. And by the time that I figured that was what was happening, it had gone completely and totally flat. It just so happened, however, that back at church in my own car, I had something that could do the trick. A bicycle pump, a good one. One that I don't normally carry around with me. But for some reason, I happened to have it in the back seat, and it turned out to be just what was needed in order to pump enough air into the tire that I wouldn't feel like I was the one that had deflated it, and I could give him a hard time when he got back. Well, anyway, you know what that's like, guy stuff. Um, so this week, the Bible reading is a story about Joseph, who was an obnoxious little kid that really got on his multiple brothers' last nerve, last collective nerve. Now, it takes a lot for 11 brothers. Well, anyway, you'll hear the story later on, and stick around so you do. But what it comes down to was that in the long run, in the wider picture, it turned out that this really annoying little kid actually wasn't so little at that point. And he was even, well, we'll go into it later. But the point was that he turned out to be the bicycle pump that his family needed. It'll make sense if you listen to the sermon, which I hope you will. See you either on Sunday or further ahead in the video, or even better, both. Let's worship together. This comes from Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 4, and then jumping ahead a little bit until verse 12 through 28. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. These are the descendants of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other of his children because he was the child of his old age. And he made him an ornamented robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, his brothers went to pasture their father's sheep near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now. See if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." The man said, "They've gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes the dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him later to their father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornamented robe that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. For he is our brother, our own flesh." And the other brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. I don't know if you've ever seen the Irish comedy series Dairy Girls, but if you're watching this online, you can look it up on YouTube. There's a great character in it named Sister Michael. She's a cynical nun who is principal of a girls' high school in Derry, in Ireland. And in one of the clips that you will find floating around the interwebs, they're on a class trip or something like that. And the girls meet some boys who stop by for a visit after curfew. And the door bursts open, and Sister Michael steps in, and she's followed by another girl, a very prim little girl, who says, "They were having a party, sister. I could hear the music." And Sister Michael replies, never taking her eyes off the main group, "Thank you, Jenny. You will go far in life, but you will not be well liked." You got to see it. It's the delivery is the big thing in this one, but you know exactly what she means. Well, Joseph, who was the great grandson of Abraham, the patriarch, Joseph, who was grandson of Isaac, who survived childhood trauma, was almost killed by his own father, and went on to establish the branch of Abraham's family that would become the central figures of the book of Genesis, in tension with his half brother Ishmael, who would have a family that comes in later in the tale of Joseph as the Ishmaelites. Joseph, son of Jacob, who came to be known as Israel, the one who strives with God. Joseph began his life very much like Jenny on Dairy Girls. He was, as his brothers viewed him, a little snitch. Mind you, he was annoying in a lot of other ways to start with. He was his father's favorite, and it was clear even in the way that he was dressed. He had his special clothing. Genesis says Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him an ornamented robe. Nobody really knows how to translate for sure that phrase about the ornamented robe. Ornamented is probably a good compromise. Aside from this chapter, the only other place in the entire Old Testament where that wording appears is in Psalm 45:13, where it's used to describe the clothing of a king's daughter. It may mean of many colors. We all hear Joseph's coat of many colors, Joseph's Technicolor dream coat. It may mean a robe with wide sleeves. That's another possibility. It may mean embroidered. So ornamented really covers whatever it might actually happen to have been. And all of those terms point to it being expensive. And none of those terms point toward clothing that was suitable for herding sheep and goats, or for any kind of heavy outdoor work, or any kind of heavy indoor work for that matter. Nothing that any of his brothers might ever have been expected to do. Joseph, his clothing implies, was special, exempt. And then there was his habit of telling his brothers about his dreams. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field," as if he's out there doing it with them. But anyway, that was his dream. "There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly, my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." Yeah, try interpreting that. It's pretty straightforward. And it wasn't just one time either. He had another dream, Genesis says, and told it to his brothers, saying, "Look, I've had another dream. The sun, the moon, and the stars, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars." He had 11 brothers. Get it? The sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is that you have had? Shall we indeed come, I and your mother and your brothers, and bow to the ground before you?" So his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the matter in mind. So the time came that their father sent all of his sons, except Joseph, off into the wilderness to take care of the flocks. Then he sent Joseph out, but later in the season, to check on them. Joseph, the one who knew the least about doing the actual work and what all it took, He was made their supervisor. Good move. Really good move, Jacob. I don't know if anybody else has ever seen that kind of situation in their own work experience. It always goes so very well. Well, anyway, Joseph goes out, and apparently he was preparing to look around and then return home and give his expert opinion on everything that they were doing wrong. And he'd find something wrong. He would go far in life, but he would not be well liked. Well, he wasn't. It was the final straw for his brothers. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of this dreamer." Not exactly the best solution to their problem. And somebody at least saw that. Their brother Reuben said, "No, that's too much. Don't kill him. That's one step too far. Let's just sell him off into slavery." Well, he was going to come back and rescue him, but one of the other brothers, Judah, said, "Let's sell him off into slavery." And then there was a cover up which involved taking that ornamented robe of his and dipping it into some blood so that they could take it back to their father and say, look at this. And Jacob himself would conclude that he had been attacked by a wild animal and killed. No, Joseph was not well liked. But he would go far in life, which you don't expect at this point in his biography. But once he was taken out of that pit, and once he was sold to slave traders, and once they took him across the desert and sold him off in Egypt, this Joseph, who was so obnoxious to his brothers, found that the skills that he had developed, which were not their skills, no, he didn't know about the things he was going to report on, but he did know about indoor work. And he did understand other skills. And taken out of that setting and put into Egypt, he found himself in a place where the foreign culture, a foreign culture filled with rich and powerful men who relied on their managers, was one where he would thrive. It brought him from the edges of that world into the centers of government in this new place. Because his new social position, beginning as a slave, but nevertheless as part of the household of one of Pharaoh's officers, that placed him in a way totally unimaginable and unplanned by his ancestors or his living family, that put him in a place where he would manage to make his way, even though it would involve him in political dangers and for a while land him even in jail. But whereas out in the desert tending the flocks, his brothers had thrown him into a pit because of his arrogant dreams. Here, even in prison, his ability to interpret the dreams of his fellow prisoners would eventually lead to his release. And, in fact, to his being given a place as an advisor to the Pharaoh himself, ahead, ahead of the position held by the man who had first bought him in the slave markets. Genesis tells the story this way. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and there came up out of the Nile 7 sleek and fat cows, and they grazed in the reed grass. Then 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly and thin cows ate up the 7 sleek cows and fat cows. And Pharaoh awoke. Then he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. 7 years of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Then 7 years, thin and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. You see, Joseph had been called upon as he had developed this knack for interpreting dreams. And here the Pharaoh called on him again to do exactly that. And Joseph gave the Pharaoh good advice. During the years of good harvests, set aside stores of grain and prepare for years of bad harvest. And dream or no dream, that is good policy. And Joseph's skills were beginning to come forward, and they were helping him to go far in life. He was growing up. He had grown up. He had to grow up. And he came very close to not growing up at all. But there in Egypt, he was in the midst of what turns out to have been a historical moment. The world was changing. You can see it as you read through the Old Testament. In Genesis, you can see how the old city-states familiar to Abraham, Haran, these were declining. And we know that from archaeology as well. It's not like somebody one day woke up and looked at a calendar and said, "Oh, I see that the Bronze Age is about to collapse and the Iron Age is about to begin." And that isn't how things happened, but it's close. They were on the cusp of one world turning into another. And across the lands of the Bible, at this time, larger empires were being formed, and Egypt would be among them. Joseph annoyed his brothers, but as he grew older and matured, he displayed the skills that, properly nurtured and properly applied, would be the ones needed in the coming years and coming centuries. And those would not only help him get ahead, but they would also, as we'll see in next week's reading and hear about in next week's sermon, they would also help him to protect the family, the people of his father Israel, at a time when many other small nomadic groups would disappear or lose their identities. This one would continue, and they would even hold on to their connection with their God, the one that they had been worshiping through a period of about 4 centuries or so of living in Egypt. Or maybe it would be better to say that because of Joseph, or because of Reuben and Judah protecting him, or because of Jacob unintentionally giving him an awareness of how to manage things, somehow those skills that he was able to exercise would open a window for God to keep track of the people in a way that would let them avoid being absorbed into all of Egypt's ways, or for that matter, the ways of any of the other empires that were around then or that have ever been. As times change, which they do as generations rise and fall, God watches over his people by providing leadership that is suited for whatever challenge is present here and now, but also whatever challenge may be on the way. And sometimes those skills, those leaders are welcomed. And at other times, they seem like pests or a nuisance. And occasionally they are such a danger that God's own people may reject them or eliminate them or try. Not everyone, hear that clearly, not everyone who claims to see the future and the way to it is going to be trustworthy. Some of them will be dangerously crazy. Evaluate that. But given a proper hearing, some of them may speak truths which are hard to hear perhaps, but they carry wisdom from God himself, and do that for the good of God's people, and in the long run, for the whole world. We'll take a look at it again next week, how some of that happened. But thanks be to God that it does.